What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today I have a fun video where we're going to talk about the top 10 fails I have made as a welder or fabricating stuff, just welding in general. So let's get into it. So I have made a lot of mistakes in my life, both as a welder and just in general. We're going to focus on the welding mistakes. And I got to say, this video is a little bit embarrassing for me, but hey, making mistakes is in the channel name, so it's only fair that I share some of the stupidity or stupid moments that I've had in my life. So number 10 is fires. I have started a number of fires out of typically stupidity. Now, some of them I just didn't understand what was going on, but a lot of times, like, I have trash laying around where I'm welding or cutting stuff. Next thing you know, the trash bin or the crap on the floor is caught on fire. Or like one time I was in the back of a garbage truck welding and there was some cardboard and trash on the floor and I was wearing a powered respirator. Next thing you know, long story short, I'm welding, sparks go in that. I lift up the respirator and almost choke from the smoke and realize, oh shit, there's a fire in here with me. That was fun. Luckily, it didn't cause the garbage truck to burn down. But anyways, if you've been around welding long enough, I guarantee you've started some accidental small fire somewhere. It's gonna happen. And I've definitely had my fair share. Luckily, no serious major catastrophes with that. Number 9, welding stuff on backwards. I've done this probably at least 5 or 6 times where somebody gives me something that's broken, borderline in pieces. I cut it apart and then weld it back together the way I thought it went together, and somehow I screwed up and it's exactly opposite or reverse of what it should have been. I had this on a hydraulic arm once where it kind of came in pieces. I welded it together and I did a phenomenal job. I was so proud of myself. Like, it was one of the first major quality repairs that I ever did, and I made good money on it. But guess what? I give it to the customer and he says, "Man, this looks great. But hey, dude, you're an idiot. You welded it on backwards." And I'm like, oh my God. So that'll happen. You'll have that. And that's why I take pictures of what I what I repair now and have for years, because it just helps me. If there's ever a question, hey, what way is this supposed to go? I look at the picture, and that's reduced that to where I don't have too many of those anymore. Number 8, I did a video on this particular repair. It was a rear hatch door on a sucker truck or a vacuum truck, Vector for the sewers. And it had an issue where locking pins weren't holding the door shut and there was some damage and all sorts of problems, right? Well, I ended up taking this big locking lug receiver where a pin went in to put pressure to hold the door shut. I ended up cutting or arc gouging out the whole big thick block of steel. It's like a rectangle block like this by, like, I don't know, 4 inches. I arc gouged it all out, welded it in. It looked like money. It was absolutely perfect. And guess what? Well, I had the door open to weld it. I ended up shutting the door and then realized that the door hit what I welded in. And once again, oh, you dumb idiot, you say to yourself, because it's like, well, there's no real easy way to fix this because it's such thick steel and there's so much weld on it and it's hitting. I thought initially, well, I'll just angle grind down some of it to clear, but it was like, I would have had to have angle ground down 3/4 of an inch on a 4 by 3 inch block or something. It just wasn't happening. So guess what? Tail between the legs, had to arc gouge all the welds out, reposition it, double check that it actually cleared the door this time, and tack welded it in and then re-welded it out. Now, that stupid mistake could have easily been prevented had I listened to my brain the whole time, because the whole time I was welding it, I thought to myself, man, what happens if this doesn't clear the door? Well, I should have checked that, should have called someone over and had them shut the door while I had it tacked, and that all would have been prevented. But guess what? I didn't, and there you go. I was an idiot. Number 7 and number 6. These are kind of related, but we'll talk about number 7. Back before I knew how to weld, I was probably 16 or 17. My father had bought a flux core wire welder, a Lincoln Electric, an old school one, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And a buddy of mine had a muffler for his Honda or something that he wanted to weld on, and I'm like, well, I got a welder, and because I have a welder, I can do that. Well, no, the answer is you're an idiot. When I was 16, I didn't know what I was doing, and I basically welded the muffler on, And then he called me later that day when he got home and told me that it fell off on the highway or something and was rolling around, and it just, it failed. My welding failed. Now, at that point, I did feel genuinely bad because, well, why would I want to do that? And it makes me look like an idiot. But the truth is, I didn't know what I was doing. Now, in that situation, the muffler itself had happened to be very thin wool stainless tube, and I was welding a stainless muffler onto rotten exhaust with flux core, which has a fair amount of penetration, and I didn't know what I was doing. So it's not too surprising that that completely failed. I wish I had a picture of what the weld looked like. It probably was terrible looking, and the fact that it failed was just proof that, well, I didn't know what I was doing. Now, number 6 actually happened after that muffler fell off. The same buddy had an Oldsmobile Cutlass where the top shock tower mount, which is simple stamped steel, had broken off and he needed to repair it. So him and I pulled the gas tank out of the Cutlass and we kind of cleaned up the metal a little bit. And it was an overhead weld, which you can imagine if I couldn't weld a car muffler on, and I probably wasn't good at overhead welding. Well, anyways, we had pulled the gas tank and cleaned up everything. I put a new shock tower tab in it, started welding it, and I swear it took me like 45 minutes to do a simple 1-inch weld on a shock tower tab. And my buddy's like, "Hey, dude, what the hell's going on in there? Blah, blah, blah." And I'm rushing it and don't know what I'm doing. Get to the point where I'm like, okay, this is done, and I roll out from under it because I was sitting on a creeper, I think. And I told my buddy, "It's done, I think." And I'm not exaggerating. The shock tower, when I said I'm done, I think it's okay, literally fell off of the car. Like it just fell out and hit the ground when I said I was done. And like, you can't make shit like that up, like unbelievably ridiculous. And I don't remember what happened in that. I think I ended up calling my father, who had some welding skill, and he ended up coming over and welding it in. But needless to say, I didn't know what I was doing in that situation. And I actually didn't touch a welder for better than 15 years, I think, after that situation, maybe even a little bit longer than that, because I'm like, welding isn't for me. And now look at me. I'm still making mistakes, but I'm just at least a lot better at welding. Number 5 on stupid mistakes, burns. I was going to put this with number 10, but this is its own thing, I think. I can't count how many times, like, this here's a burn, this is a burn. I know that playing with molten metal, you're going to get burned, right? So why wouldn't I take adequate safety precautions, as should you? Well, hey, we're guys and girls and we're idiots sometimes, but needless to say, like, hey, I was wearing welding gloves when I received these two, right? But guess what? When you're doing really weird out of position welds where hot metal can somehow pop down in your glove and sit there and burn you, or if you're an idiot like I was in the case of this one, I had a cut somehow from an angle grinder through the glove, and somehow a molten hot cherry of a welding rod went right down in the glove, somehow didn't burn my finger, and wound up sitting here, being pinched between the glove and my hand and burned me. Well, hey, burns are part of welding. Sometimes it's pure stupidity, sometimes it's just bad luck, I guess, but be smart about that. But that's a very common occurrence. I'm sure you have some as well. Now, number 4, this one is pretty embarrassing, but it could have been even worse, and that's welding on the wrong polarity. I was on a job welding a ton of socket welds on a roof for a refrigerant system, and I struck an arc with an engine drive, and it sounded weird. It had like this weird hiss sound to it when I was welding, and the bead kind of looked messed up. I tried adjusting amperage, I had tried adjusting settings. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I didn't like it. It was worse with 7018 rods than 6010. 6010 kind of seemed okay. And I spent like 50 minutes trying to figure it out. Said, screw it, just kept welding. I thought the engine drive was just screwed. Okay, and I thought that was a problem. So, well, the guys I was working with, they were under the opinion too that the engine drive just had something wrong. Well, they were over, I don't know, a couple hundred feet from me doing something else. And I thought to myself, oh, what about the polarity? And I went over and looked at the polarity on the machine. And sure enough, somebody, it wasn't me, but hey, I didn't check it, hooked the stinger to the negative, and I was welding on electrode negative. And I didn't tell the guys that I figured out what was wrong. I just switched it and kept welding, and everything was fine after that. But needless to say, that would have been pretty embarrassing had anyone else just went over to the welder and been like, hey, you idiot. It would help if you were on the right polarity. So I got lucky in that case, but that's happened to me a couple times. So be mindful. If something doesn't look right, sound right, do something about it, investigate. Number 3, I'm not going to take full ownership of this. So, and you'll understand why. Like, I generally take ownership of my own failings as an individual, but this is kind of a communal thing. I was on a job welding some pipe for a ammonia system, and there's multiple grades and types of pipe depending on where the pipe is going in the system, because there's different pressures, there's different temperatures, so thus different grades of pipe. Well, I was put in charge of welding out a bunch of fittings. I think it was 5-inch piping. I had to weld elbows and the pipes and all sorts of stuff. And I spent 3-4 hours, did a bang up job, really good looking welds. Everything was perfect, ready to go. And the foreman of the job comes over, looks at me, stares directly in my eyes and said, "That's great work, except you welded the wrong pipe." Again, it goes back to that oh shit, where you think to yourself, oh man, I'm an absolute idiot. Kind of like getting pulled over doing 120 miles an hour in a 25. Like, you know that, like, you screwed up, and because you care, well, you're screwed, right? Well, in this case, it truly wasn't my fault, because I didn't even understand what the different grades were, nor was I put in charge of picking the pipe to weld. I was only told what to weld. So it really fell on the shoulders of another individual I was working with. However, because I welded it, I still played a major role in it. And from that, I learned, well, make sure to double check with someone who knows what they're doing if it's right. And don't just arbitrarily start welding on something thinking you're doing the right thing. Like, I've been burned a couple times so far with the piping world with that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm partially to blame. And since I was the last person to touch it, I'll take the responsibility for it. But hey, mistakes happen. Number 2, most embarrassing screw up. This one has to do with a garbage truck, and I don't know if I shared this one before on this channel. So I had to weld a floor in a garbage truck because the floors more or less get wore. You have like a slope surface and what's known as a packer blade, and it pushes stuff against that slope surface to kind of crush it, and then it pushes it into the hopper part of the truck. Well, for that municipality I worked at a while ago, I had to put a new floor in because it was wore all the way through to where garbage and juice was leaking out onto the ground under the truck when it was operated. Well, not knowing how to replace the floor because I've never done one before, I asked the second shift welder what his thoughts were, because he had done some, how to do it. And I was very clear when I asked him if the floor in the garbage truck was double layered. And what I mean by that is you had a layer on top, you had something that separated it like tube, and then a layer on the bottom. So like it's double walled. I said, is it double walled? He says, yes, it is. And I said, so I can torch cut it? And he says, yes. Well, what I didn't understand is that what I saw when I was in it, it was not double layered. It had reinforcements behind it, the floor of it, but it didn't have like dead space in there. So I was the idiot that took a torch and started cutting, and I cut the whole floor out thinking I could peel it off and just throw the new floor on and everything would be fine. Come to find out, I was torching through the whole floor and could have very well, I can't believe it didn't, set the whole truck on fire, because hot cutting sparks were being thrown on the high pressure commercial tires, on the air lines for the air brakes, on the braking system, on the drive shaft, on all the grease underneath the truck. And somehow I got extremely lucky and I didn't set the truck on fire, all because of a miscommunication between me and the guy on night shift. Now, in all fairness, that isn't totally my fault, but what I should have done is cut a little bit, then got out and looked to verify. I didn't do that, and I just got really lucky. Now, if you learn one thing from this video so far, is that screw-ups tend to be a lot worse when other people realize it. And the fewer people know, the better off you are. If you get really good at hiding screw ups, and that's a good thing. But in this case, nobody really knew the screw up I made because I put a new floor in, welded the crack shut, which was a pain because I couldn't stick weld it because of the gap. For the most part, nobody I worked with knew it. They couldn't talk junk about it, and it wasn't super embarrassing in that respect, but I still feel like an absolute idiot for doing it. The stupidest mistake I've made since I've been welding is kind of a complex one, but I'll simplify it. So I weld pipe for a living now, and I do all sorts of welds on socket welds and butt welds and you name it. Like if it's on piping systems, I have to weld it with TIG, MIG, dual shield, as well as stick welding. Because of the huge variety of things that I have to weld, mistakes are going to be a given, especially because I have not been welding pipe for very long now, only approximately 1 year of my life. And it is its whole entity. It's a lot harder than most forms of welding. Well, I was put on a task of taking square plates, welding an insert that was threaded to the square plates, and all I was told is that it would be good, like put good welds on it so that they don't leak. I didn't really understand what they were for, but I'm like, okay, the boss doesn't want them to leak, and I know TIG welding is a clean process, and I was in a shop to do it. So I set 3 or 4 of the plates on a table like this, put the fitting on it, and I chose to TIG weld them. The reason I chose to TIG weld them was the insert was threaded, and I was worried that if I stick welded it, I would destroy the threads, they would pull, and then whatever gets threaded in it wouldn't fit. So my logic was I could control a heat input, put a very small, precise weld on it, and everything would be fine. So about 4 of them I did on a table, and I would weld about half of an inch, and they were small fittings, maybe only 3/4 or so around. I welded it in quarters or like thirds, and I would weld a little bit, stop. I would weld the opposite of it, stop, and then I would overlap. So I would start like halfway on the weld and then go all the way. Like I did a very quality TIG weld. Visually, they were exceptionally good. So 4 of them I did like that. 4 of them I did on a turntable. So they had a rotary turntable, and I have never used one. I set it up, set the speed, and I sat there with my TIG torch and filler, and as it's moving around, I welded it, and it was, again, a perfect looking weld. I'm like, great, that's all done, knocked it out far faster than the boss wanted them done. I'm great. Where the problem lies is they got shipped to a job, which I also went to that job, and they were made to be welded on the end of a pipe, and they were pressure test ports. And I'm like, oh, okay, big deal. You hook up nitrogen, you pressure test to see if you have any leaks. Well, guess what? They ended up spraying liquid on it for leak checking, and at 200 psi with nitrogen on it, the weld on that fitting leaked. And next thing you know, I'm getting a call while I was at the job, says, hey, you dumb son of a bitch, your welds are leaking. What the hell? Giving me crap over it. And I'm like, okay, I come over, get in the scissors lift and look. And sure enough, there is bubbling coming out of that little precision TIG weld. And I'm like, well, first off, I didn't know what these were for. And second off, the ones that were leaking were the ones that I did on a turntable, which only had one start and stop, and they were leaking in the middle of the bead. Now, to this day, I don't know why they were leaking, honestly, because I didn't have tungsten inclusions. I was running 130 or 40 amps, which is more than enough. I pushed a bunch of filler. My thought is this: they only had 308 stainless rods around the shop. I don't know why they didn't have steel, and it was not stainless steel that I was welding. I think it was a combination of the 308 stainless rod and the lack of deoxidizers in it, along with that fitting that I welded. When I was TIG welding it, smoke was coming from the threads because there was oil on it. Now, I cleaned all of it spotless to where there was like no mill scale or anything, and it welded perfectly clean. But I think it was a combination of the lack of deoxidizers and maybe somehow oil contaminant on the piece that left a little pore or something in the weld. Now, what's funny to me is I wiped the bubbles off of the pressure test where it was sprayed, and I couldn't see any defect on the weld. Like the hole must have been absolutely microscopic, nevertheless, the hole. Now, where this is really embarrassing is that I had a group of about 7 or 8 people that really needed the pressure test to pass in order for insurance companies to give the stamp of the AOK, go and start the job, because it was a repair job. And here it is. I literally held up the whole job by approximately 4 or 5 hours with multiple people, including multiple superintendents, all knowing that I was the one that up. So I don't think it gets much more embarrassing than that, if you ask me. And it's definitely the worst screw up I've ever made. Now, I, without a doubt, learned that never one pass anything that needs pressure testing. That's a guaranteed mistake waiting to happen. And I have worked diligently hard for months to build a reputation that A, I know what I'm doing, and B, I do quality work. And for the most part, that has kind of been a distant memory in people's minds, but still, it's a stupid screw up that had I just not done, I'd be in a lot better spot. Well, with that said, if you got any bad screw ups, feel free to leave them in the comments. I would be happy to read them, laugh at your expense, much as hopefully you laughed at my expense, and we can all get a laugh together on it. I'm sure you guys got some great stories as well. With that said, thanks for sticking around for the video. Until next time.